It started with the kind of pounding that doesn't ask for permission, the kind that rattles your chest before your brain even catches up. Boom, 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 and a voice shouting, "Police, open the door right now," and I remember thinking, half asleep, half panicked. This has to be a mistake, because my apartment was silent. My phone said 2:41 in the afternoon, and I had gone to bed less than 3 hours earlier after another brutal week where sleep felt optional and exhaustion felt permanent. I sat up, heart already racing, that cold, tight feeling creeping in. You know, the feeling that tells you something isn't just off, it's wrong. And when I stumbled to the door and looked through the peephole, there he was, uniform, badge gun, standing way too close to my door, shoulders squared like he'd already decided how this was going to go. And when I asked what this was about, still groggy, still hoping for some normal explanation, he snapped back, "Noise complaint, step outside immediately." And yeah, that happened. A noise complaint while I was asleep alone. No TV, no music, no guests, nothing. I told him that calmly because I've learned calm is armor. And instead of explaining, instead of checking anything, his voice hardened and he said, "Last warning, open the door or you're getting arrested for obstruction." And that was the moment the sleep fog burned off completely, because most people hear that and they comply. They don't want trouble, they don't want things to escalate, but I've spent years watching what happens when people comply just because someone in uniform tells them to. I'm a civil rights attorney, and I've made a career out of sitting across from officers who swear they followed procedure while video quietly proves otherwise. And standing there in my pajamas, barefoot on my own floor, I knew he didn't have the right to be doing what he was doing. I asked him to identify himself. He refused. I asked what noise, who called, he ignored me, and then he said something that still makes my stomach drop when I think about it. He said if I didn't open the door in 10 seconds, he was going to assume I was destroying evidence and force entry. And I remember thinking, evidence of what? My nap, my silence, my existence, and my mind started clicking through the law the way it always does when fear shows up. No warrant, no exigent circumstances, no probable cause, none of it added up. So I grabbed my phone and I did 3 things almost on instinct. I opened my Doorbell camera app, something I'd installed months earlier for packages and honestly almost forgot about, and there he was on my screen, face, clear badge number, readable, every move captured. Then I started an audio recording on my phone, and then I texted my neighbor down the hall, another attorney, asking if he'd heard any noise from my place, and he replied almost immediately, "Dead silent all day," which somehow grounded me like proof that I wasn't crazy, that reality still existed outside that door. The officer pounded again, louder, more aggressive, and I kept my voice steady on purpose, asked again for his name, and this time his voice dropped quieter but more threatening, telling me I had 10 seconds before he came in, and that's when I called 911, because sometimes the only way to stop a badge is to put it on the record. I told the dispatcher exactly what was happening, an officer at my door claiming a noise complaint, threatening to force entry, refusing to identify himself. And when she came back on the line, sounding confused, and told me there were no calls for service at my address, I felt this strange mix of dread and relief. Dread, because that meant he really was lying. Relief, because now it wasn't just my word. While I stayed on the line, I heard his pounding stop. I imagined him listening through the door, and then a supervisor came on, calm, professional, asking me to explain everything. And when she told me to ask him for his name again, I did loud enough for the phone and the camera to hear. And after a long silence, his voice changed completely, smaller, uncertain as he finally identified himself. Seconds later, the supervisor told me something that flipped the whole situation on its head, that he wasn't even assigned to my precinct, that there was no legitimate reason for him to be there, and that I should not open my door for anyone until backup arrived. And not long after that, I watched him walk away on my camera, fast glancing back once, and in that look I saw the realization that he'd messed up badly. When the supervisors arrived, they were respectful, apologetic even, and I showed them everything, the video, the audio, the texts, and my neighbor stepped out to confirm the hallway had been silent all afternoon, and one of the officers just shook his head and said under his breath, "This is serious." And at the time, I thought he meant just this incident, but later I learned it was much bigger. What I didn't know that afternoon, but found out soon enough, was that this officer had been under internal investigation already, that 2 other women, both attorneys who had challenged the department, had reported similar encounters, officers showing up with vague excuses. No records, no witnesses, no video, just intimidation, and until my doorbell camera, they hadn't been able to pin it on anyone. My footage changed that. Investigators pulled his records, his database searches, his patrol computer, and what they found was chilling. A list of attorneys, addresses, notes, visits outside his jurisdiction. Always in uniform, always with a story, sometimes gaining entry, sometimes backing off when challenged, and when he was arrested days later, charged with trespass, stalking, official misconduct, misuse of police databases. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's nightmare unravel on the news. In court, my doorbell footage played on a big screen, his face, his voice, his threats every second undeniable, and when the verdict came back guilty on all counts, there was no celebration, just a heavy sense of this is what accountability is supposed to look like, even if it comes late. I sued the department too, not because I wanted a payday, but because patterns don't stop unless someone forces them into the open, and the jury agreed, awarding damages and ordering changes that should have happened long before I ever heard that pounding on my door. People ask me all the time if I'm glad I had the camera, if I think it saved me, and I always pause because the truth is I don't know what would have happened if I'd opened that door, and that's exactly the point. I still have that camera. I still record everything, and I still tell people the same thing. Knowing your rights matters, documentation matters, because sometimes the line between being a victim and being a witness is thin and fragile and made of glass and silicon, and the decision to keep a door closed. So let me ask you this honestly, if you were half asleep alone and a uniform outside your door threatened arrest, would you have opened it? Do you think officers who fabricate reasons to force entry should ever get a second chance? And where do you draw the line between authority and abuse? Because I want to hear what you think. Drop it in the comments, argue with me, if you want. Share your own story, if you've got one, and if you believe these conversations matter, stick around because there are more stories like this and they don't always end with a camera rolling.